assembled here today. We are here to have a discussion on the topic, fiscal policy and elections, and we are immensely proud to have our alumni, Professor Chakraborty, as our resource person.
Even as the global economic outlook is stabilizing, fiscal policy continues to struggle with legacies of high debt and deficits while facing new challenges. Public finance risks are acute this year as over 80 economies and economic areas are holding elections amid increased support for high government spending. The IMF has warned that the most acute risk to public finances stems from the record number of elections being held in 2024 against a backdrop of high government debt and stubborn economic development gaps. In this context, as students of economics, it is key to understand the issues related to fiscal policy and elections. Firstly, I invite Professor Sheeja SR, Head of the Department, to deliver the welcome address.
Respected Professor Lekha, dear Professor Lekha Chakraborty, Professor A.K. Prasad, Professor Manju S. Nair, Professor Anita, Dr. Christabel, Siddiq, research scholars and students. Many studies have investigated the behavior of fiscal variables during and after elections, particularly in the context of low-income countries. And some studies have indicated that during election years, government consumption significantly increases, leading to higher fiscal deficits. During the subsequent years, the fiscal adjustment takes the form of increased revenue mobilization and cuts in government investment with no significant reduction in government consumption. Thus, these studies have concluded that election not only imply a macroeconomic cost but also trigger painful fiscal adjustment in which public investment is largely sacrificed. To delve deeper into various dimensions of this topic, we have with us today a distinguished alumnus of our department. Professor Lekha Chakraborty is professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and she is an elected member of the governing board of management of International Institute of Public Finance. Professor Lekha is also a research affiliate at the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College, Yemen. Lekha is a pioneer economist who has worked for institutionalizing gender budgeting in India. Professor Lekha's work experience on macro fiscal policy and human development spans across 8 countries: Sweden, Canada, Morocco, Philippines, South Africa, Sri Lanka, Vietnam and Mexico. She is the author of 3 important books: Fiscal Consolidation, Fiscal Budget Deficits and Macroeconomy, published by Sheeja; Social Sector in Decentralized Economy, India in the Era of Globalization, published by Cambridge University Press; Fiscal Policy for Sustainable Development in Asia Pacific, Gender Budgeting in India, by Palgrave Macmillan. Professor Lekha frequently visits our department, and for her, visiting her alma mater is just like homecoming. With much pleasure and love, I extend a warm welcome to Lekha Chakraborty. I take this opportunity to welcome all faculty members of this department, research scholars and my dear students. Once again, a hearty welcome to each and everyone. Thank you.
And the third prize is shared by Vani and Namya and Steny Juice. Thank you, ma'am. Now it's time to welcome our resource person formally.
S. Chakraborty is a professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. She is also an elected member of the Governing Board of Management at the International Institute of Public Finance. She is a pioneer economist in institutionalizing gender budgeting in India. She is a research affiliate at the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College. Her areas of interest are macroeconomics of public finance, fiscal federalism, financing human development, and gender budgeting. She is the recipient of Infosys Best PhD Thesis Award from IISc Bangalore. She has worked for the IMF, World Bank, ILO, UNDP, UN Women, and Commonwealth Secretariat. She has been a visiting professor at various universities and has papers in national and international journals. With much honor, I invite Professor Lekha S. Chakraborty to take over the dais.
My dear Dr. Professor Sheeja, who was my classmate in Karyavatam in 1993 to 95, faculty members, Sneha and your friends, and young scholars who joined the department this year, and both of you who is comparing the program, a warm good morning to all of you, and thanks for having me. It's an emotional moment for me because I was speaking to my classmate after a long time. So from that state of mind, now I have to deliver the lecture. So we were catching up, we were talking in her room, and she asked me to deliver a lecture today on fiscal policy and elections, of course against the backdrop of the recent elections. This takes me to the question, why do we vote? Or why did we vote? That's an important question. Either double cake or it's okay, huh? Okay. So why do we vote? That question we need to ask ourselves. So that's the beginning point of my lecture today on elections and fiscal policy. You ask your mind, why did you vote this time? There are several theories about the voting, and I enjoyed a small book. It's titled Calculus of Consent or Calculus of Voting by Anthony Jones. You can read that book. So in that book, it's theoretically explained that why do we vote? What is that calculus of consent we give to a particular party to come back or to start a fresh government. So in that calculus of consent, there are many variables, some vote to have benefits, to have the utilitarian effect of the voting process of that individual. So we call it as the benefits he or she gets when he votes. So you can think yourself that you voted just to get the benefits from the voting process. Otherwise, it's P variable. That's a probability of an individual in your mind getting the power when you vote. So that's a P. So B and P, the benefits you get from the voting process and the probability of your candidate winning the elections. So these are the two powerful variables when you look into the equation of calculus of consent. And sometimes you are tired, you don't feel like voting. So what are those variables that makes you tired that, then the democracy will collapse if most of the citizens are getting tired thinking of those variables, like those experiences. What are those variables? Like it's cost related variables, that psychic cost, waiting time. Then this is a cognition. It's a process of, cognition that you need to align your mind when you get to the polling booth to press a candidate. So this cognitive process many of us don't want to undergo. And in villages and all, somebody helps. Okay, you come and vote for this particular person. So they come in group and celebrate that event in village and they vote for a particular candidate. Their leader says. So it's a cognitive process. It has cost. If that C variable, the cognitive process of the psychic or the weighting or that C variable is greater than the B and the P, the probability of your candidate winning the election, that dream you have in your mind, and if the P, the benefits or the utility you derive from your voting process, then you don't vote. So that itself is a limitation of this calculus of voting or calculus of consent, that equation. In the sense, if the P and B, P into B is less than the cost of voting process, then the democracy will collapse and it's a moment of embarrassment and you don't vote. So then William Ricker, another American political scientist, he put some more variables into the equation to have a balance, and those variables are related to D. Like, you might have thought in your mind right now that no, it's not B that led me to the polling booth, not the benefits, not the probability that I had the power to get my candidate back to the power, not the probability. I don't have any severe cause as well that I'm ready to go to vote. But what you might have thought is voting as a process of your duty, isn't it? As your right, you are a citizen. So it's my duty or it's my right that I have to go and vote. So that's another variable. So this is the calculus of consent equation. I'm not doing it in the board. I will share my PPT to our charismatic HOD. I love her. I will give my PowerPoint to Professor Sheeja. So she will distribute that PPT to all of you regarding the calculus of consent. Now this is the theory. Now we need to test this theory. How to test this theory? There are many political economy articles related to the calculus of consent. This is a public choice related literature. So how do you test the theory? Either as ex ante to the election process, you come and collect these variables by talking to the perception. It's a kind of a perception survey. Otherwise, after the elections, you go and collect these variables and you test the theory. So that's a way, there are articles, there are empirical evidence that is built up on the process of this public choice and the calculus of consent. Now, the theories also speak about the principle of subsidiarity and the decentralization process. In the sense, many of the decisions are taken also at the level which is closest to the people. It's not only the Lok Sabha or the national elections, but there are elections which happens closest to the people. So in that process, when you read the decentralization literature, you can understand that we have a voting with feet process. What is voting with feet? Voting with feet means in the decentralization framework, if you are not happy with a jurisdiction, you vote with your feet to the jurisdiction which satisfy your public service provisioning or satisfy your needs. So you move to a jurisdiction where the public service provisioning is best and resonate with your needs. But that power a citizen does not have, in the sense migration. What has happened in the COVID time, or in the post-pandemic time, the people move in millions to another place. That is not voting with feet. Voting with feet is you do it with empowerment. So you cannot test the Tibu hypothesis. It is T-I-E-B-U-T. So Tibu hypothesis of voting with feet with that migration or a crisis movement of the mobility of the people. But if the citizen is empowered, they vote with the feet, and that is the Tibu hypothesis. So that's about the literature. Now get into the fiscal policy and how can we relate to that to the election process. There the question, the research question, the starting point is democracy determines public expenditure decisions. So that's the question, the research question we have in hand. Democracy determines public expenditure decisions. Now there are many, there are empirical evidence regarding this. People have tested it using the randomized controlled experiment methodology, and you know about Esther Duflo, right? Esther Duflo won the Nobel Prize. So Esther Duflo and her team tested this question, whether the democracy or the governance, and she asked a question further, the feminization of governance, does that have power to turn the expenditure decisions, the public expenditure decisions, favoring women's needs? That question was tested. It was using the randomized controlled trial experiment. That means you control certain jurisdictions and you test it. And they used it at the lowest tier of the government, that is after the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. It is by mandate that more than 33% of the jurisdictions when they come to the bar should be women. So whether women in the jurisdictions, the governance, that feminization of governance that can turn the expenditure decisions incorporating the revealed preferences of women. This is one question. Second question is, how do democracy determines election? Like there are many political economy models that you can read in Journal of Development Economics or Public Choice. There are many journals around where the researchers ask the question, when in the fiscal policy decisions, whether political economy variable operates or whether they are significant. One question, Pinaki Chakraborty, who was the previous director of an IPFP, and I worked with him on a paper. We asked the question, fiscal stance and the output gap, are they related? If they are related, is it positive relationship or a negative relationship, or should we control for the political economy variables? In the sense, if the fiscal stance and the output gap is negatively related, that leads to the question of counter-cyclical fiscal policy. Meaning, if the economy is doing well, the government will push back, or the government don't pump prime, but the economy is in the lowest or in the recession, the government can pump prime. So it's kind of a negative, indirect or inverse relationship between fiscal stance and the output gap. If there is an inverse relationship between the fiscal stance and output gap, then you can pitch counter-cyclical fiscal policy narrative. But this equation or this question, you cannot ask without incorporating the control variables, incorporating the political economy variables. So the election regime, there are many ways in which you can clean up those variables and put the political economy or the election related variables. Once you control for that, what is the relationship between your fiscal stance and the economic output gap? So that question you can ask. There is one way in which research proceeded using this election variables and fiscal policy. Another way in which this, researchers looked into, scholars looked into this question is the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. Like the top government give money to the lower levels of government, and Finance Commission is an important institution related to this process. So in that intergovernmental fiscal relations, whether we incorporate this political economy decisions, what is it like? Then second question you can ask is, prior to the elections, do you experience a spurt in public expenditure spending? If you are experiencing an increase in the public expenditure spending, what kind of public expenditure spending decisions are taken by the government prior to the elections? So most of the studies prove that prior to the elections, the visible government spending will be there. Visible in the sense, infrastructure, suddenly a spurt in the roads, in the case of public infrastructure. Otherwise, there is a spurt in the cash transfers to the hands of the people. Otherwise, the last mile connectivity, what is the way in which you can reach to the voters directly? So there's a kind of a different style of public expenditure decisions we incurred. Now, one study I want to talk to you about this political economy of the fiscal transfers. And that study, it was done by Shubhadu Dasgupta. Shubhadu is a professor in JNU. He has got double PhD, like one from MIT and other from University of Chicago. So economics and political science, okay? So double PhD. He has asked this question. His authors are from ISI Delhi. He asked a question. What about this political economy transfers? Whether they have any connotation with this, the fiscal variables. So there he identified, or the inference of that paper is, if it's a conditional transfer, then it is tied. The flexibility of using that finance at the local level is limited. That doesn't have any impact. But if it is unconditional transfers, of course, that has got a significant impact. So these are the different ways in which this question related to fiscal policy and elections, or the, it's more than elections, it's a democracy, whether it is related or not. So these were asked. Now, you take a look into the fiscal monitor done by IMF recently. The title of the fiscal monitor recently published by IMF is Elections and Fiscal Policy. What are their concerns when they looked into the analysis of fiscal policy and elections? So, I have taken a screenshot of that executive summary. I don't want to read that, but I will speak to you about the concerns. So the first starting point of that fiscal monitor in the executive summary is that more than 50 governments or the countries are getting into elections. So what's the nature of the fiscal policy? What are the things to be looked into in the contemporary public finance? The starting question is high deficit and high debt, whether that affects the election process. What is the way people perceive that? High debt and high deficit. But people perceived it very positively, in the sense they perceived that this expansive government or this expansive fiscal policy or accommodative fiscal policy is quite crucial, especially when we have come into a post-pandemic fiscal strategy space. It's very important because we are talking about a post-pandemic fiscal strategy space. So people perceived it positively. Second question is, world is passing through polycrisis. Polycrisis in, there's a big mafia now, like the heterodox school of thought economists are talking about polycrisis because we are not getting a space in the World Economic Forum where they focus only on the GDP. Now a group of economists are talking about polycrisis to take the debates ahead from the GDP. Like everything is not in terms of the economic growth. So in the polycrisis, we talk about the geopolitical uncertainties, we talk about war, we talk about the climate crisis, we talk about energy crisis, and also this mounting debt crisis. So we need to look into this multiple crisis. We cannot focus on just one variable, GDP, when we talk about our fiscal policy stance. So how the polycrisis affects your size of government? That question is very crucial to look into. And size of government, how do you capture? It is the total public expenditure to GDP. You have to normalize it with GDP. So you need to ask that question about the polycrisis and your size of government. And the rest of the things happen only once you fix your size of the government, the total expenditure to GDP. Now, in this era, the fiscal transition and the energy transition, there is a correlation between two. Because we have global commitments related to the climate. And we need to move ahead to the non-fossil fuel economy. And this has got its own implications for the fiscal transition. Because you're losing many taxation powers if you're moving to a non-fossil fuel economy. But overnight, emerging economies cannot do that because we have energy poverty issues. So this is one question. Second is mounting global inflation due to the supply chain shocks. Now you read in newspapers, in the business dailies, that the waters that's getting affected because of the geopolitical uncertainties. The Suez Canal is not functioning, Red Sea is not functioning. So you are getting your consignments delayed through the Cape of Good Hope route. So that increase in the supply chain or those kind of delay in the consignments that affects your economy through mounting global inflation through supply chain disruptions. It's a supply side shock. So you need to look into that. Then mounting energy crisis. The oil you're not getting not at least at the $100 per barrel. So when the Monetary Policy Committee takes the decisions regarding the interest rate, it has happened just one day back, right? They have to look into what is happening in the global economy and those geopolitical variables. Now, when you have mounting inflation, when you have supply chain shocks, when you have climate change crisis, what is the way in which you need to look into these questions, especially against the backdrop of the government's deciding, or the elections, so deciding the size of the government. This is an important call. Now, recently, the MPC meetings, we have decided that we are keeping the interest rate status quo. Interest rate in the sense, the repo rate is at 6.5%. So that is quite a high rate of interest. Now, what is the way in which the fiscal policy need to respond to that? In the beginning, I mentioned that the economic policy or the fiscal policy is remaining accommodative by keeping the debt and deficit high to tackle the economic growth recovery process. So if that is the case, if the monetary policy is getting tightened, then what is the way out? What is the coordination of the fiscal policy and monetary policy? And whenever an economist is asked about predict what is the growth rate for this quadrant or growth rate for this quarter, we always say it depends on the monetary policy and fiscal policy coordination. Nothing more than that. Of course, geopolitical uncertainty is there, but it all depends upon your monetary policy and fiscal policy coordination. And things are not easy to get into this. One, we need to think about the level of the deficit. And by mandate or by rules, the level of deficit is now fixed. Now the flexibility is to think about how you finance your deficit. That is, again, it is not mandatory, but it is again, we have moved away from the monetary financing to the bond financing. So what is bond financing? You have loanable funds. You take the loans from the loanable funds market to finance your deficit. And by theory, it says that you have a crowding out. That's why the finance minister has now articulated that it will not lead to crowding out process, because we may be financing the deficit using the loanable funds, but that's for the infrastructure investment. And Oliver Blanchard and many economists now powerful in articulating this narrative that when you have a post-pandemic fiscal space, when you have the public crisis around, you need to keep the fiscal policy accommodative by keeping your deficit and debt high, but articulate that with physical infrastructure or capex related, or use it for reducing the output gaps. So this is the way the narrative goes. So you can talk to me whether you are comfortable with this narrative, because infrastructure is not alone physical, it has to be social infrastructure. Now within this strict paradigm, how do you incorporate? Because elections means it has to be directly related to the human development or people-mattered budget initiatives. These are the new terms. So how do you make your public expenditure people-mattered? So then you have to ask the questions about human development and the climate crisis. One way in which we incorporated these variables is through the thematic bond financing. Thematic bond financing in the sense, you finance your deficit through bond financing, but a portion you need to tie to the climate change commitments. We call it as climate bond. In Argentina, that portion of the bond financing in the market was tied to the gender equality concerns. They call it as gender bonds. So are we ready to move ahead with thematic financing of deficit? Like within the deficit, you are taking a lot of borrowings or public debt, but you're thematically arranging it for a crucial purpose. It's a kind of an earmarking. Are you ready to do that? This is one question. Second, you need to take decisions about the taxation. Taxation and elections are directly related. If you increase the taxes, people won't vote you back, because people have the voting behavior in retrospect, what the government did. In retrospect, people vote you back to the power. So if you touch the taxation, will people vote you back to the power? Because there is a kind of debate in India that inequality and tax policies are related. Okay, how this is related? You can tax the wealthy. Should we be moving in that line? There was a huge debate, like it was triggered by sampling through. So there was a huge debate, like should we be taxing the rich? Will that help us to reduce the inequality? So this question was asked, and I don't know whether the students have answered in your mind in affirmative that it's good, like you tax the rich. But we tried this in 1970, 1971. So you need to look into the hysteresis of the taxation policy which has happened in India. A moment you think about that process, Garibi Hatao was the political slogan of Indira Gandhi that time, poverty eradication. At the same time, she was increasing the taxes, and Indians, including the surcharge, we paid around 93% taxation. So what is the incentive for people to work, people to go entrepreneurial? You know, there was no incentive, because if you are heavily taxed in a country, then using that revenue mobilized for decreasing the inequality and the poverty. So that was the thing. Of course, your revenue stability is very important for your expenditure decisions. How do you reduce the widening inequality and poverty? But will you agree for this, that if you are in a particular slab, tax me, it's good for India because you can use it for inequality reduction. But what has happened is that it led to the tax evasion, it led to black money, it led to the tax havens. You know, people started looking into very innovative ways in which they can park their money. So that is not illegal. Illegitimate you cannot say, but whether it is ethical, that question. So in the taxation policies, this question related to legitimate versus ethical questions came up. You know, there are many ways in which people started evading, and that was a big concern. So we failed to put that initiative, like taxing at the high rate that's not leading to a decrease in the poverty or inequality in the economy. Taxation is not a powerful tool for redistributive justice. If taxation is not a powerful tool for the redistributive justice, then you need to focus on the public expenditure decisions. So what are the ways in which you can design your public spending to decrease the poverty and inequality of your country? So these are broad statements. You can ask me counter, no, why can't we use taxation policies for the redistributive justice? You can ask me questions. Now, within the taxation policies, another important factor you need to look into, and when people hit elections, when they press the button, they also think about the crony relationship of a state with the business sector. State-business relations is very crucial when you analyze the fiscal policy and elections, because we are not comfortable in electing a government back to power if the government is crony and having a serious state-business relationships, which is not good. Because this deals, there is a book by Harvard economist, Professor Lam Pritchett, that the name of that book, the title of that book is Development and Deals. You must read that book, the political economy of the state-business relationships, because deals create inequality. How the state-business relations can go crony. The mining sector, how that can go crony. So these are the questions within the taxation realm we need to ask, because this also influences the mind of a voter. Or when you give the calculus of consent, you also look into the power of the government to have a clean, without deals, government to be back to the power. No, in the mining sector, what's happening is that you extract minerals. The natural resource taxation is not the part of intergovernmental fiscal transfer in India, but in many countries a part of intergovernmental fiscal transfer. When you mine, when you extract the revenue, you give a portion of that extracted revenue back to the place in which you extracted the mineral to correct the inequalities there. Suppose if I am going to Orissa or Jharkhand, many mineral-rich states in India, Goa. Goa, there is a huge judicial activism, so that stalled the process. If you're doing that, what is the corrective mechanism? Because you cannot coerce the people to extract the minerals. So what India has done is, within this taxation policies, whatever the mining taxation you extracted to the government, within that mining taxation, a portion was designed to earmark to address the inequalities, the spatial inequalities, whether people were happy with that. Like you're plowing back a portion of the royalty you earn from the extractive process back to the districts in which you extracted the mineral. And this happened in other countries as well. You call it as cashing in on oil. Oil-rich countries, this cashing in on oil is you extract the oil, but a portion is tied or earmarked to correct the spatial inequalities or development concerns. It happened in South Africa. They call it as black economic empowerment. And Jindal, they were in trouble because of this black economic empowerment, because they didn't look into the racial variables, because they were doing their business, and that company was put in trouble in Africa. So there is a kind of incorporating these concerns within the fiscal policy when you design it. So I talked to you about the taxation side. I talked to you about the public expenditure designs in which we can, win the hearts of the people by connecting the last mile connectivity. Now the third is the governments. They are not functioning in isolation, not in watertight compartments. There is a process of, fiscal transfer or intergovernmental fiscal mechanisms. How that functions, how it is affecting your calculus of consent. If you look into that, you need to unpack conditional transfers and unconditional transfers, which I explained to you using Shubhado's paper. So unconditional papers nobody liked because conditional transfers nobody liked because they come with a lot of conditionalities and there is no flexibility of finance at the local level. Many researchers test it through flight papers effect. And flight paper, that, money stick where it hits. So they try to understand the impact of a fiscal decision on citizens' mind. Like whether the intergovernmental fiscal transfer or the own tax revenue you collected from that jurisdiction or that province, which variable has got more impact on public expenditure decisions at the local level. If you are a finance minister of a province, you have to take decisions regarding local spending. So if the intergovernmental fiscal transfers unconditional, if that's comfortable, then the money is coming from above, so you can take a lot of decisions. But own tax revenue means you need to extract it from the people around. But the theory says that, the public choice theory says that there is a fiscal illusion there. Fiscal illusion in the sense citizens cannot discriminate between intergovernmental fiscal transfers and own tax revenue. So what the bureaucrat use for the local public expenditure decisions, citizens, they are not aware of it. So if the IGFT is more, the coefficient is more, you say that there is a flight paper effect. So this is a citizen kind of this niche canon. Students can read niche canon. This is the most simple way, non-technical way of articulating to you the flight paper effect. But students can read the niche canon, the theories by niche canon, and this illusion. So whether flight paper is significant or not, you need to ask the question. So this is very relevant when you think about designing your local spending. So these are the different ways in which the political economy questions were addressed in the empirical literature. And theories, I talked to you about the principle of subsidiarity you can look into, voting with feet by T. Boot you can look into. So these are the theories, and calculus of consent by the Anthony Dons with the variables from the William Ricker. And also Buchanan. Buchanan is a powerful economist who looked into the second generation theories related to the role of government. Because when we talk about the role of government, the first generation theories always, in the public finance, always believe that the government is benevolent. But the second generation theories, they do not approve that the government is benevolent. Then came this public choice theories, because if the government is benevolent, the government will do everything favoring, what is a citizen needs, right? So if government is not benevolent. So you can read that decentralization literature on first generation theories by William Oates. That is what I call as the principle of subsidiarity, that it is best if you take the decisions at the level of government closest to the people, that is subsidiarity. In the post-pandemic space, European Union talked about the principle of subsidiarity because the COVID needed to be handled at the level closest to the people. Now, second is Tibu, voting with the feet, that generations, the citizens will move from the jurisdictions to a place favoring their own taste and preferences. So these are first generation theories. Second generation theories of decentralization get into this assumption that no, government is not benevolent, we need to look into the public choice theories. And all these fly paper effect, niche can and everything will come under the second generation theories of the public finance literature. So that's about these theories and the variables, and take a look into the chapters in detail of the fiscal policy and elections. They have done a beautiful analysis in that chapter, and they looked into, of course, the deficit and debt, the level of deficit and the financing pattern. That's crucial for a country to look into when it comes to the backdrop of elections, and decisions on the level of deficit. That is suffocating the fiscal space. Because if your fiscal space is tight, that affects the public expenditure decisions favoring the citizens. So how to re-look into the fiscal rules? Because discretion is less in our economy now. No political maker or the bureaucrat, they don't have any space or the discretionary space now, because it's all tied. In the monetary policy, you have the inflation targeting as a strict rule-based monetary policy, and on the fiscal side, you have these rules based on the 3% Maastricht Treaty. Even the European Union has that tight fiscal rule. But that led to fiscal austerity measures. And when the government hit elections, they don't get into fiscal austerity measures, because no citizen like if their salary is staggered, if the pension is staggered. Nobody like that government to be voted back to the power. So you need to take a call related to that. And now there is a transfer of seigniorage happened prior to the elections, like a lot of money in the form of dividends came from RBI. So we were asked that what the government is going to use if that fiscal space is now little. Okay, so whether that seigniorage will be used for capital spending or tightening the revenue spending, we were asked to be. At least I told that it's a tough call, but ideally social infrastructure would have been given preference, in the sense now the articulation is a mindless focus on capex, and we believe that you invest on capex, the capex bring economic recovery process, they crowd in the private investment, but we are curtailing the spending related to the social infrastructure, which is mainly education, health, employer of last resort policies. So because employment is a big question now. And yesterday, I don't know whether you watched Turbo. I was watching Turbo, and in the intermission when I came out, I was asked a question by the journalist. It was in the WhatsApp. It is written, Modi government, Modi 3, is now taking a big decision that the statistical revamping is going to happen. They are going to put more surveys. They are going to take the decisions about the frequency of the variables. They are going to decide on the methodology. So I looked at this WhatsApp message, but I don't know whether I was in that turbo state of mind. That's why these are like government is going to revamp statistical system. Like that, it was hitting my mind. We need a quote from you that it will come in tomorrow's Express paper. So I was thinking that whether it is good or bad, because this government was targeted for data fundamentalism. You remember that, if the data is not favoring the government, they didn't release the data. So the same government is now taking a decision that they are going to focus on the national statistical system and revamp the statistical organization in terms of increasing the frequency of the variables, increasing the surveys, and also, methodological revision. This is an important question to be looked into, because if I ask you the question to run a model for me related to the fiscal stance and the output gap, incorporating the election related variables, the question you need to tackle is the growth. How do you calculate that output gap? There, this GDP is a crucial variable. In our country, whether you believe it or not, GDP is highly extrapolated. Why the GDP is highly extrapolated? Because many of the components of the GDP that should have come from the updated survey estimations. But I have a table, I will give it to Professor Sheeja. I have a table in which the components, the surveys, are outdated by more than 10 years. And how then this GDP is estimated? It is highly extrapolated. And employment. In Western world, employment is a crucial decision by the government. And if you ask any heterodox economist, what is your plan for taking the economy to the next level, they tell employment. In sleep, awake, in dream, if you ask a heterodox economist, employment policy. Government should be an employer of last resort. That's the only answer. Everything else will fall in place. This is a way heterodox think. For that, to design the employment policy, you should have a clean employment statistics on board first. In the Western world, the neo economy, the monetary policy, when you talk about the output gap, that is estimated on the basis of employment, not GDP. In our country, we have a periodic labor force survey. We know the limitations, and we know that CMI, the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, Manoj Vyas, he came up with a lot of high frequency estimation about the employment statistics, and we know the limitation of that survey methodology, the way they select the sampling and all. So the data is not reliable. So now, if the government is focusing on the statistical system to focus on the GDP and the focus on the employment statistics, that's welcome. So that's a way I have written that it is welcome if you're focusing on that. It's okay, because GDP methodological revision happened, and you know how the GDP of our country is done, right? It is like mainly two components are there. One is the gross value added. You have different sectors like agriculture, industry, the manufacturing, mining, everything inside that, and tertiary, the service sector. So you have a gross value added. Then you have a fiscal component. Fiscal in the sense fiscal variable, that indirect taxes minus subsidies. So when the government, withdraw a lot of subsidies, that, the GVA and the GDP, that gap was very huge, and we all came on panel and talked about that, panelists are here from our state. So we always talk about why this huge divergence between the GDP and the GVA, when the subsidy component was hugely reduced, the fisc, that became significant. So there are many issues related to the estimation, the methodology of the GDP and the way we calculate the GDP. And now we can also look into the GDP from another perspective about consumption, investment related variable. There we came to know that recently the GDP is investment led. We were asked another question, are you comfortable? It's not a consumption led growth. So when it was consumption led growth, then that time government was not doing a lot of capex programs. So we all argued that consumption led growth is not sustainable. It has to be investment led growth. Now it is an investment led growth. The moment fiscal policy thinks about controlling the deficit and debt, controlling the public spending, especially the capex, then the GDP will not be investment led growth. So it's all depending on that capex which is getting reflected into that. But if you ask me capex investment and growth, whether that is related, I will say that it is a lagged effect, it is related. And about econometric models, how do you incorporate lags? When you run the regression, professor can ask you that it is not a lagged model. You have just run with the teeth point and it cannot be the case. You need to ideally optimize the parameterization. So how do you look into the optimal parameterization of a model? That's an important question. Otherwise, professors will not leave us. They will ask, you cannot run your models with the teeth time. It has to be t+1 or t+2, that lag thing. And how do you decide on your lags in your model? That lags decisions, you cannot say that I'm putting 2 years lag for all the variables. That equal lag for all the variables also professors will not agree. So optimal parameterization is a crucial decision you need to take when you run the models, and there are various criteria in which you can take that optimal parameterization of your model. Then only people will believe. And endogeneity, a lot of issues your professors will tell you, because we face a lot of scary moments that when you run the model, people will ask, how do you tackle your endogeneity? How do you tackle your optimal parameterization? So when you run the model, these are the important decisions you need to take. Otherwise, people will not believe your model, whether it's a political economy model or or a strict economic growth variable model. It's 12:30. I want to take questions. So let me stop here and open the floor and answer your questions. You can talk to me about the different components of the fiscal policy and the election process, and the process in which you voted. What was your calculus of consent? Even in Afghanistan, I am told by ma'am that you came from Kabul. Hope you enjoyed literature, and you can also connect because you have a different kind of government. It is not democracy, and the kind of government and the fiscal policy also you can test it. And this variable we can get from that Sweden institute. They categorize the governments, and recently that Sweden that institute categorized India as elected autocracy. It's not democracy anymore. So it's a kind of a system of government also affects the calculus of consent and the fiscal policy decisions. And the presence of a donor, like in the financing pattern of deficit, the difference between the Kabul and New Delhi is that ours is mostly internal financing of deficit from the bond markets, but in Kabul, external financing of deficit is high. And in Sri Lanka, it was high, and we have seen what has happened to the small island Sri Lanka when the external financing of deficit is high, when you have a lot of conditionalities and you need to articulate to the external that interest rate differentials. A lot of variables affect that external financing of deficit. So these are the ways in which different countries. So I was focusing on India because I am most familiar with my country, but you can share the knowledge related to Afghanistan. Any other student other than Afghanistan? Last time when I came, Yemen was here. Yeah, you're from? Yemen. Yeah, you can also talk to me about it, because fragile economies and the strong economies have different kind of experiences. And there is a paper by Olson. He's a public choice related economist. Manson Olson's literature, it's like bandit. One is a roving bandit, other is a stationary bandit. And Columbia School, they have a lot of empirical papers about this. And what roving bandit or stationary bandit. Roving bandit, they exploit or extract and they vanish. But the stationary bandit, they slowly exploit your economy or extract the resources, the taxation, everything with a lag. So you can take a look into that. It's a small book that Olson's, you can Google and tell me what's the name of that paper or book. Olson, roving bandit, stationary bandit. If you put these 3 keywords, you can tell me. I am unable to recollect it right now. So that's another way in which you can look into the fragile economies and the strong economies, because then, and the emerging economies. We need to study these in a different setup, because the fragile economies, oil-rich economies, these models will be entirely different from the emerging economies. These are all studied, and I always tell students about Geeta Gopinath's that paper on cycle is trend. It's an important literature. You can take a look into that paper, Cycle is Trend, which says that in the context of emerging economies, We don't experience strict business cycles. If you don't experience strict business cycles, then what are you planning in your country by, making fiscal policy as a counter-cyclical fiscal policy? Whether that counter-cyclical fiscal policy narrative or counter-cyclical monetary policy narrative, whether that functions properly, you need to take a look into the moment you cannot date your business cycles. So I stop here and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, ma'am, for good lecture. I'm Shafiq. My name is Shafiq from Afghanistan. Actually, we in last 2 decades we had 4 times this election process in Afghanistan. 2004, 2009, 2014, and last 2019. In developing countries, people have very bad experiences from this election process and government fiscal policies. In Afghanistan, also we had these experiences. Mostly the government, the central governments focus on their own benefits to increase their own rights, votes. That's why I had questions like from the Indian government. Is there any specific institutional law or specific fiscal policy law that central and state Indian governments follow it during this election process? In our country, there is no such like this. That's why I raised this question, because we faced with too much problems. In last elections, which happened in 2019, and the total population of Afghanistan is around more than 34 millions. The vote which counted on the last elections, it was 1,900,000. That's very less. Yes. That's why people disappointed and they do not go to the vote.
This 34 million still just 1 million?
Yeah, 1,900,000.
This was the election spending or the total size of
the total size of the votes, yes. People do not trust on that to go there for vote. Yeah. Thank you. This is the
Actually, in my country, they finance the deficit of the government by using tax. And in my country, the private sector is playing a crucial role. So this affects the situation in the country too much because the tax is so high. So this results in a crowded out of private sector.
It results in the
crowded out of the private sector.
Out.
Yeah.
Okay,
So this affects the economy.
You came across any papers related to Yemen, which says that the high spending by the government crowds out the private sector in the context of Yemen. We can find out that literature.
Actually, no.
Okay.
But yes. So because there is a war in my country now, so government faces a physical deficit. But the private sector is during war playing a crucial role, okay, compared to the government. So the government to face this physical deficit rely on the tax. So this tax is very, very high. So this affects the private activities. Yeah.
Thank you. Name please? Shaima. Thank you. Go ahead. Speak up.
Ma'am, as we all know that Kerala is performing well among Indian states and Kerala being a model to other states. But the kind of attention in terms of fiscal help from the center is very low, and Kerala is even questioned in Supreme Court for the borrowings, for the borrowing rates. So, like I think it's high time for center to give us some autonomy. And what do you think is acting as an hindrance for Kerala? Because center is focusing more on equality than equity. So, and we know that there are regional disparities in our country too. So, like, how do you think the puzzle will be solved?
Yes, thank you so much. See, she asked a tough question. If I say I go political, yes. And tomorrow that function, EMS meeting in Kerala Sangeetha Academy. So there, on 14th morning, Brinda Carrot, our we are on this federalism panel. Yeah, if it is there in the YouTube, I send you the link about the discussions. It's going to be very tough. Yes.
My name is Kutino Bernard from Kenya. And listening to your presentation, there's a point when you were talking about government expenditure. When it comes to the periods where we are nearing the elections, more often the government increase their expenditure. And the expenditure may be in terms of transfers or in terms of development, which makes the government appear as if it is benevolent, like it's working for the people. And so my question just comes, is it really as a form of government being benevolent, or is it as a form of government just trying to maximize their own benefit out of it? And another thing, when you look at it, when the government expenditure increase, which means you have got a lot of increase in money supply, kind of. So what happens to immediately after the election? What happens to the inflation? Can we say that the increased government expenditure prior to the election can lead to some increased inflation after the election? Thank you.
Very good. Your name is?
Bernard.
Bennett.
Yeah.
Bennett, can you give me a little bit background about Kenya as well? What's coming to your mind? Yeah, about Kenya's policies. Just brainstorming, that's all.
Actually, this is, I don't have a solid background politically, but when you look at it, this scenario that I was trying to map in your mind is basically what happens in my country when it comes to election. We have got a lot of transfers that happens from the government, and some to the politicians individually, like one-on-one. That one is not illegal. Mostly it's in form of bribery or kind of, because what the politicians want to do is to maximize their votes. They want to get into power. Then the government also tries to increase their expenditure to some extent. Like we have got old age scheme, where some transfers are always made to the elderly people above 70 years of age. And you find that after each and every election, there's a possibility that inflation always, like the prices always go up. The prices of the basic commodities mostly goes up. And I think it is due to the increased expenditure by the government and the politicians. That is why I asked that question.
Thank you so much.
Question regarding the fiscal policy.
Your scholar?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm a research scholar. My name is Adit. Ma'am, my question is, the government has been continuously saying that it will be changing its role from a regulator to a facilitator for the economy. So, how far is it practically possible to be a facilitator in a country like India? And the second question is, at the time of these neoliberals and neoclassicals, what's the relevance of fiscal policy in an advanced country or a developing country like India?
Thank you.
My name is Alina. I'm second semester in my economics student. Ma'am, you have said like increasing taxation. increasing taxation won't be a solution to reduce inequality. Instead, focusing on increased public spending would help. That's what you said, right? So, in the context of mounting fiscal deficits, how can we rationalize increased public spending? And if we adopt taxation policies, what would be the moderate level of taxes? Would we need to appease the corporates, or we need to appease the poor people, or the middle class? That's it. Thank you.
Sheeja ma'am told me that it's going to be very tough, Lekha. I've seen that.
Ma'am, my name is Annie Joseph. My question is, in your opinion, are there any emerging market economies which is performing better in terms of fiscal picture, so that India can adopt it as an example or in her way forward?
Annie, repeat the question.
Ma'am, in your opinion, are there any emerging market economies performing better in terms of fiscal picture, so that India can adopt it as an example?
Annie, for you, when the market performs, when the fiscal policy performs better, in your mind, is it a discipline, fiscal discipline, when the government is fiscally disciplined, then you think that the fiscal policy is better? Or what's that articulation about, you're asking about the context of an emerging economy better than India in terms of fiscal policy. So I am formulating that answer in my mind. When I can call that the fiscal policy is better, you think that the fiscal discipline is growth enhancing, or an accommodative fiscal policy, little bit of deficit and debt, that is okay if it is leading to growth recovery process. So how should I answer your question, or how do you articulate that good fiscal policy? Then I will counter answer that.
Ma'am, I believe in inclusive development and focused on social welfare of the people.
Sure. So inclusive fiscal policy.
Yeah.
You're not worried about a strict fiscal discipline or anything by keeping the deficit under control.
No, I'm liberal on that.
Yeah, you're liberal on that. Students are good, heterodox. Thank you, Annie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. The articulation, it's already that economist language is there in all the students who spoke to me. From Yemen, from Kenya, from Kabul, and also Sneha, Annie, of course, Elena, everybody has that economist language already. And thank you, professors, because that is already there in the students here. I am insatiable for more questions. This is the beauty of focus group discussion, like each one powerful. Yes, clarifications? Go ahead.
There are some undergraduate students.
Sure. Yeah, UG students here. I need to. I heard that it's a brilliant group now. A lot of good news about you guys. Happy about it. They'll talk to me also. It's an internal information that students are very good. Just you can introduce yourself. You can talk to me. What you perceived from my talk. Just talk to me. So you guys didn't enjoy my lecture? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of you talk. Representative? Okay.
Yeah, and I'm a honor student, so I became a skip since I'm
Skip, yeah, me too.
yeah. So I am not originally of an economics background, but I heard your talk and it was very informative as always, and I love the question from them, especially the questions from them, which was much more understanding since I am not very known about the economic language as you just said, because I'm not very clear with that. but it was very informative. And the thing that you talked about, we were having the same talk in political science department the same morning about election and the economic influence in it and how economy is affected by election and all. And
Share with me that?
yeah. So, okay, so what I want to ask is that while we are critically analyzing about how elections are affecting our economy and the fiscal policy, especially the revenue and all, so while we ponder upon it, my question is that we organize elections or people vote for them, like by the people, for the people and all that. So my question is, while we critically analyze, is it not that even though we are spending a lot on elections, it is for the people only? That's my only question. Like, we always say that elections have this and this problems and we are questioning it in a way. But from a political standpoint of view, election is very important for the people because it is our choice that we are making there. It's our point of view that someone will take a better action in the coming year for us, exercising our powers. So while we are questioning election and the point or the idea of it, in an economical standpoint of view even, it's very important. So even though we are just facing a problem an year because of the election, the future years that will come might be much better. So it's like towards the light kind of point of view, isn't it? That's all I have to say.
I will. Before that, you share with me some punchline you heard about
So, no, we didn't get to the part of the punchlines there, but...
So you will say that Lekha also didn't give me any punchlines in the talk?
No, not like that, but yes, we did get...
Good.
Oh God. Oh God.
Just the punch you got from that lecture. Whatever you inferred from that lecture, what that?
Okay, the best one that I heard today was that India gave a chance to Modi. India gave a chance to democracy.
Oh, she's supplementing.
Marie, help me here. Because I heard it, but it was a bit confusing because
She got it. Okay. Very good.
അത് ഞാൻ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയാം. അതായത് ഇന്ത്യയിലെ ജനങ്ങൾ മോദിയെ വേണ്ട എന്ന് തീരുമാനിച്ചു. എന്നിരുന്നാലും ഇന്ത്യ മോദിക്ക് ഒരു ചാൻസ് കൊടുത്തു. അത് ഭയങ്കര നോട്ടബിൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യമായിരുന്നു.
So that was the main punchline. The English പറഞ്ഞാണ് ഞാൻ ചെറിയതായി പോയത് because yeah.
So that was what you heard there.
Yeah, the main actually what
So why BJP was defeated in this election? So the reasons behind that, and stock market, how the stock market was influenced by the election result, and before the election result, the difference, and why the majority of Modi declined, and such things. And we actually 10 മണി 11 മണി വരെ ഇരുന്നോളൂ അപ്പോഴേക്കും ഇങ്ങോട്ട് വന്നു. Yeah, we think so. So that's it.
It's a political scientist.
Yeah, that was basically more close with the political view. Yeah.
What's your name?
My name is Angel Sheeja.
Angel.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another webinar, carry on.
okay. So
The way you talk, it's like a leader. From the first sentence, that initial impression, touch me.
thank you for that, man. Thank you very much.
I think your friends know about it already.
They do, which is the problem right now.
That's why you were asked to speak.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, I'm very thankful for the chance. Of course,
Very
for conversing with you.
this interview.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Tell me, yes.
Okay, and the other point which was noted, since we already came into the political point of view, was that we talk about Modi had promised us about 1 million of job employment chances and all, and which he failed to give or grant or was unable to during this reign, which almost lasted 2 political years or the long short periods. So yeah, and that was the one which we focused upon while pondering on it. And also then his regime, his ideas, the Hindutva politics, which is almost ruining, and as you have already mentioned, elected autocracy. So this also came into the point of view, it was also in the talk, and that's where we reached till then. And my conclusion, as much as I've heard there, was that India is fighting to gain her own freedom, or trying herself to betterment, or moving, at least she is trying to maintain her idea of democracy, because we already saw that how elections went, the results that in India being having a good opposition this year was actually, it was a struggle that we saw this year, and it is a bit of hope that we see there, but we'll have to see, because once again it's my only point of view that again it's a bit Hindutva politics coming in, and it's my strong point of view there, but yeah, that's all. And what else? Nothing. Just that maybe we'll have a better point of view, or better years coming by, and we can see what it leads to, the development and all, which we were promised was not given to us, but it's a hope that maybe it will be. So yeah, and what else? Nothing more. That's all that was to say.
Thank you, very good. Thank you so much for representing your class.
Thank you.
Very good. And Angel spoke, you also spoke like, like little, one moment, one line at least. Let me hear your voice.
Ma'am, my name is Dept Mary Varghese. Even though I'm a beginner, I was interested in this class. Thank you so much.
What you enjoyed most from my talk? Just a keyword you can tell me. Yeah.
I got the name of the book, Calculus on the Consent.
Calculus of Consent. Give her a big, calculus of consent. I carry this word with me. Whenever I write in column, Lekha, she will use this calculus of consent. So that's very important. That the entire talk of mine, you just gave me the gist that it was about calculus of consent. That's a beauty. You absorbed it perfect. Thank you.
Hi ma'am, myself Parvati. This talk was very informative, but even though I am also a beginner, there were some issues in understanding all those topics. And for me also, the first word that I have noticed was Calculus of Consent, that book written by Anthony John here. And I have noted that name, so I hope I can read about that. And thank you so much for the talk. And I think in the upcoming talks, I will be able to understand better, so that I can also ask some good questions, and we can have a good discussion on it. Thank you.
Sure, Parvati, you read that book, because that's a beginning to understand about this election process from a political economy perspective. Calculus of consent. That's very good. Good. Okay.
Hello ma'am, I'm Senu Lakshmi. So I'm really looking forward to have a talk on political economy, because I'm actually much interested in economics as well as in politics. So even though I'm not familiar with that economic language, I just want to ask you, what do you think of India's position, the Indian economy's position in this international, or in the world? Because India have achieved the fifth largest economy in the world, and we are the third largest economy in case of the purchasing power parity and all. So what do you think of India's economy, and what the future concerns and all? What do you think of them? Thank you.
Are you positive about it, our economy?
Yes, really. I'm really optimistic.
Optimistic. What are the factors that is positive in your mind that we will do better?
I think our villages can perform really better in the coming years. So as the villages will develop, because the route should be
our
villages, the regional level, the
village.
Yes, village.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we are really strong in case of this regional level government, local government and all. It has empowered the women, diverse sections of society and all. So if the villages can perform well in case of some cottage industries, agriculture, and if economy can perform in that village or in the regional level, then our country can really perform well. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I just want to know, What is your opinion on that?
Sure. Thank you.
Hi ma'am, my name is Meenu Varki and I'm just a beginner and I look forward into studying more about economics in the coming years. That's it.
I will be happy.
Even I get to know more about Indian economics and some books which they mentioned. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
And yeah, sure. Add Parvati.
Yes. I have heard about the CLSA, the investment management company, and listed 54 shares. Shares, not I think 54 companies like this, like Modi's share. I don't know the proper word for that. And before the election, like result, and after the results came out, only 8 performed well. So what's your opinion on that take, like about that issue?
Your economics, finance and right? Economics, finance and
No ma'am, I'm doing BA honors with research, but I read about this news in newspapers and
how
all.
many finance students are here? Economics, finance. Okay, same answer. Nakula. Okay. Thanks.
And I'm planning to take economics in my 4th semester as my major option.
Okay, sure. Parvati, Crystal answers like your finance students. Because she asked about this volatility, she's asking about it's more or less it's an event related instance in the financial market. It doesn't show anything about the way economy performs or anything. It's an event related volatility in the market. I take it like that and I end there because I work with Ministry of Finance Research Institute. So within the constrained optimization, whatever I can say what has happened in the stock market is an event related, but prior election, it's an event related.
But don't you think that CLSA is a reputed investment management company and don't you think it affected the small scale investors, like small investors?
Absolutely. I will answer to that over a cup of tea after the class. He's recording. Okay, so all what I can tell broadly is that it's an event related incident in the volatility in the stock market, but it doesn't relate to the health of an economy at all. We'll talk about it. Thank you, because it's a very focused question. Yeah, thank you. Finance students want to add anything about the volatility of the stock markets and the elections? Because
Like, personally, I view it as a random walk
Correct.
in economy, and it's just a hike in the prices, and many speculators gain from that. That's all.
Yes. Anything to add? Sure, you add something. It's a random walk. Yeah, okay. That's a very good way of speaking that. She already starts the Wall Street economist language. It's a random walk. It's a rally or something like that. Good. Yeah. More questions this side, in the second row over there, and the girl with the specs. You can talk to me. Yeah.
More controlled by their foreign aid in this sense, such as that of policies to do with tax holidays on minerals and mines. So I first of all want to find out, is India in this case receiving aid also from foreign countries in relation to politics and elections? Then how best can countries like mine avoid such, so that they can make their own policies sound and more of policies that can benefit the people than the politicians themselves? Thank you.
Kenya, right? You're from
Zambia.
Zambia and me.
Mwami Bilimo.
Spell it.
MWAMI.
M-W-N-Y. Moni.
MWAMI.
A-M-I. Moni.
Yes.
Moni. You know, I heard morning, ma'am. I thought you were telling me morning. Good morning. So, it's Nomi. Okay. Thank you so much for that question. About the tax holidays. Yes. Either Chakraborty. black questions and more later. Black. No questions. You just ask something or reflect something. Reflect. You just reflect 1 second. 1 second. 1 second.
Ma'am, I heard new terms on that thematic bonds. So
thematic bonds.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
It was really a new term for me, and I have searched Google on what's it, and I learned that it's on sustainable development goals and
I like that
terms.
Thematic bonds for climate and
So it was really new information for me.
So the clear?
Akash. Second semester.
Second semester. Okay. Thanks.
My name is Aparna. So I want to ask about the electoral bond. Like, how is it related to the fiscal policy, or how far it helps in financing the fiscal? Okay. At the time of elections, we usually will be familiar with the electoral bonds.
What's your name?
Aparna.
Thank you. Are you clear?
My name is Fasnia. I'm first time economics student. So you talked about feminization of
governance.
So I want to hear more about that.
Wonderful. Oh, brilliant.
Thank you.
ഞാൻ വിളിക്കാതെ കൂടി പറഞ്ഞോളെ നമുക്കിനി ഒരു 2 മിനിറ്റ് ഉണ്ട് പിന്നെ എന്ത് ഞാൻ 2 minutes more. കുഞ്ഞുങ്ങളെ കുറച്ച് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് ആയിരുന്നു ബാക്കിൽ ഇങ്ങനെ മോൾക്ക് ചോദിക്കണം റെഡ് കൊടുക്കാൻ You just talk, I will be happy. ഒരുപാട് പേര് വിളിക്കുന്നുണ്ട് എന്നെ വിളിച്ചു ചോദിക്കണം. Yes, അതിനെ ചോദിക്കുന്നുണ്ട് റെഡ് എടുക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ? That she really is ready to ask this. Ask, please talk to me, otherwise I will be sad. Yeah, both of you.
I'm Sneha from first year MA Financial Economics, and the question is, on the one hand, the fiscal deficit or the overall deficit is increasing at a higher pace, and also the government is setting the fiscal targets that to be achieved. So how the government is balancing these two things together? Yeah.
Asking it, the fiscal deficit is shooting up. At the same time, we have targets to be achieved.
Yeah.
So how do you reach there?
Yeah.
Thank you. Next, your next.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So, my name is Reshma and I'm from second semester MA. So basically, I'm someone who needs to think for some more time to ask something. So I don't really have anything to ask right now. But, ma'am, no, what I have to say right now is, see, I'm someone who listens to something and then I kind of get lost. I have a very low attention span. I get lost in my thoughts, and then when I come back, it's already somewhere else. So I was here, I was just, in the beginning you said about a book, and you connected probability and voting and D and E, and I was thinking, oh, there are so many things to this than what I know, because I'm someone who doesn't really have much of a opinion on voting and election and all that. I'm someone who's like the neutral one, stands in between. Yeah, I'm the neutral one who stands, no, not the nota one, the neutral one, who doesn't really support a single party but supports a person. I look at the person, yeah, I'm that kind of a person. I don't really support a single party, but I look at the person and then I decide whether to vote for the party or not. So I'm that kind of a person, the neutral one that stands in between. So when you started, you spoke about D and E and all those things, and I was like lost in them.
It's very good, Reshma, because I was into the Anthony John's equation, P, B, C and D. And you are telling me that, ma'am, I will not fit into P because I don't vote to increase the probability of my candidate winning the election. And not even B, because I don't expect any benefits from my voting behavior. I am just like won by the big V. Big V is like, India is a huge country, so what is the relevance of my voting? Because that's the way you are thinking, that what's the relevance of my voting? Then you are not even thinking that you have cause, right? Oh, I have to go and vote, it's a cognitive process. You are not even thinking, it's not even you are thinking as a duty, as a citizen. So, what is this neutral, efficiency-based, person-based voting? Where do I fit in myself if I am asked? The test of the theory, if I am coming and asking you where you fit in this equation, whether P, B, C or D, I am not belonging to anything else, any of these variables, but something else. That's a way, it's a very good thing. I think you are the original one in the class. Like I am not fitting into this equation at all. I am not P, I am not B, I am not C, I am not D. Then you are thinking, where are you? Is it? It's very good.
I don't know where I am.
But is there any proximate, like you are electing a person based on his efficiency, not a party-based voting. So efficiency, you can correct me if I am wrong, can I correlate that efficiency of a person to B? Or it's like a utilitarian, like you're getting benefits, or that BP, like okay, if I vote that efficiency-based candidate, the probability of my candidate winning the election will be high. So can you be fitting into POP?
No. See, I'm not speaking about any place or anything. Recently, for this election, in my house, my father was like, let us vote for this party. At least he won't win for sure. At least we can increase the vote percentage for him. And my brother was like, he'll never win. So let me vote for another party. Because at least in that way, we can make that person win. Because he has a person who shouldn't win for him. Personally for him, party A should never win. Party C will never win. And party B can win if he votes for that party. So he was like, okay, let me vote for B. And I am there like, who's the best one out of this? Whom should I vote so that at least somebody will get something? Like, personally for me, I believe everybody will make some kind of mistake. Everybody might have some bad side to it. The one who's the least against it, I might vote for him. I'm the one who thinks in that way. I don't support a single party, a single person, anything. But in Kalanda Kotathil, it So I think in such a way, I make my decisions on the basis of that. So for me, that's it.
It's good that you spoke. My God. Thank you, Rishma. Oh, this is wonderful. Max Planck in Germany, Munich. Avade Max Planck Institute under. Appo ente friend Risa, she has gone there as an intern 2 years. IIT Madras padicha kuttiya. Then she worked on this voting models, okay? And in model behavioral behavioral models. Adana kuttiyude thesis. And thought process is like this. This is a starting point. So yeah, you are right, because one of the inferences her thesis spoke is like, it's not a family-based voting. The unit of analysis of voting is individualistic. More family-based, family-based women vote differently than men. That's one thing. Second, these kind of aspects, like it's not fitting properly into P, B or D and C. What could be that alternative variable we can identify and enrich this voting model literature? Third, like the way the other friends of yours talk, in retrospect, you vote back. In retrospect. So these are based on the behavioral model. She came to the conclusion from experiments and all she conducted. ഇതൊക്കെയാണ് ഒറിജിനലായിട്ടൊരു തോട്ട് പ്രോസസ്സിൻ്റെ ബിഗിനിങ് ഇഫ് യു വോണ്ട് ടു സ്റ്റഡി, ഇഫ് യു വോണ്ട് ടു റിസർച്ച്. ആൻഡ് ദിസ് മാക്സ് പ്ലാങ്കിൽ ഈ ബിഹേവിയറൽ, who is it, Professor Kaikondu. You can Google public choice journal. That professor she worked with. 2 മാസം ഇന്റേൺഷിപ്പിന് പോയ കുട്ടിയാണ്. അവിടെ ചിലപ്പോൾ 2 മാസം കൊണ്ട് കുട്ടി എക്സ്പ്ലോർ ചെയ്ത കുട്ടിയുടെ ഫർദർ പഠിക്കാനുള്ളത്. വിത്ത് ഫുൾ ഫെലോഷിപ്പ് ഷീ സ്റ്റഡീഡ് ഇൻ മാക്സ് പ്ലാങ്ക് മ്യൂണിക്. അപ്പോൾ ഡ്രീം ഹൈ. ഇതുപോലെ തന്നെയാണ് ഒരു റിസർച്ച് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ വരുന്നത്. അത് പിന്നെ എനിക്കൊന്നും പറയാൻ പറ്റില്ല, ഞാൻ ഇതിലൊന്നും ഫിറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല, ഐ ആം ലോസ്റ്റ്. നോ, ദാറ്റ്സ് എ സ്റ്റാർട്ടിംഗ് പോയിന്റ് ബിക്കോസ് യു ആർ അലവിങ് us now to think and ഒരു 1:17 1:30 നമുക്ക് ക്ലാസ് അവസാനിപ്പിക്കുന്നത്. എന്നാൽ എനിക്ക് ഒരു 5 മിനിറ്റ് ഞാൻ എടുത്തോട്ടെ to ask you the question just like the way Reshma told, why did you vote? എന്നോട് പറ, നിങ്ങൾ എന്തിനാ വോട്ട് ചെയ്തത്? Why did you vote? Or what is that motivation in you to vote? Quick ആയിട്ട് നമുക്ക് പാസ് ചെയ്യാം. പറയൂ. Oh yes ma'am. Okay.
I'm Manju. I'm first time economics student. So the way you said about the logic of voting in different things, like probability of winning, like in terms of different variables, it was quite interesting for me. Like we just think about the logical one why we are voting, but the way in that book they are representing different terms in variables, right? So it was interesting to me. And I also want to what's my opinion. So I'm someone who would look like the ideology whichever party that would be putting forward, because when we are looking at a major term, the one who is the one who won the majority, their ideologies or whatever they are gonna provide would be like they would implement that, right? So now like in a major election like this, I would always look for like more than the person that whatever the ideology they are representing, because or like in while we are looking at the whole picture, the one who won the majority would be ruling and their implementations would be what we have to deal with, right? So I'm someone who like, and also I think with the D1 I consider it as a duty or right I have to like do. So yeah, I just want to say my opinion on that. And the way that like the variables that was interesting for me, like I'm first day hearing.
Bindu, right?
Manju.
Yeah. Thank you. So you are D. Can you kind of communicate like your opinions? Why do you vote? You should grab your microphone and talk. Something why do you vote?
That's my duty and right.
Duty, everybody did it. D. Who are D in the class? Very few are duty. Duty. ഞാൻ ഇലക്ഷന് പോയി വോട്ട് ചെയ്തു ബിക്കോസ് അവരുടെ സിറ്റിസന്റെ ഡ്യൂട്ടി ആണ്, ഇത് റൈറ്റ് ആണ്. മാം ഡ്യൂട്ടി ആണോ? അല്ല, സിവിക് ഡ്യൂട്ടി ആണോ? എന്തുകൊണ്ട് വോട്ട് ചെയ്തു? ഡ്യൂട്ടി ഡി ആണോ? Speak because I want to listen to you. Microphone civics are right. Why did you vote? E, B, C, D or Lekha? This is the articulation. It's very interesting to listen to.
See, normally it is not a binary. Election is not based on binary things like yes or no, whether it is duty or right. There are multiple elements. That is why Riker's theory is very important. And he added one more element. But I would say that rather than that, you can also think about Weber's conceptualization. And he said bureaucracy, because charisma, that is what Reshma said. The charisma of the candidate is very important. That is over ideology sometimes. But that is not in that theory. So you can also add. So there are multiple variables, and based on that, so why I vote, I may having a duty or right, but because of my right I go for vote, but I can also refrain because of my right. So that is only the process of whether I vote or not. But for whom I vote is actually based on the ideology, the voting back, okay, whether I have to support the person, whether the person is having charisma, whether there are multiple reasons involved.
It's an overlapping, very interesting. It's an overlapping thing that make you.
Yeah, it's like a Venn diagram when you play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you see that okay, why I vote.
Okay.
There are variety of reasons which make myself.
But if I am strictly doing a voter right compartmentalization like B and all, I have to put you to B.
B is okay.
B. Because you are not.
It is not benefit.
It's a probability of the charismatic man.
No, not necessarily, because I have voted a person who is actually lost. So it's definitely, I know that the person is going to actually lose, but still I have actually voted for them. Because of a variety of reasons. Not one reason.
This I wanted to tell that Arnold, that film, that film actor. So people in US knew that this Arnold is going to lose the election. But still people went and voted for Arnold.
Exactly.
Because so this came up in the discussion when I taught in another class that Arnold but still people went and voted for Arnold. And it happens in,
Yeah, it is not in that sense a compartmentalized, nobody can compartmentalize. And most of them will agree that there are a variety of reasons, not one reason. One reason may be there, but a B and a B, or a D and a B, or something like that. Not one reason.
Usually, ഇത് ബോർഡല്ലേ ഞാനിപ്പോ വെള്ളാമണി എഴുതി വെച്ചിട്ട് പോയി അധിക സമയം വേണ്ട ജസ്റ്റ് ഐ വാണ്ട് ടു ഷോ സംതിങ് യു ഹാവ് എ പെൻ ഓൾസോ
Yeah, in that sense, I can also say that I have preference relations. Like I can make a ranking of A, B, C, D, and then I can say that I rank A, then B, then C, then D.
Wonderful.
Okay, and because there are a variety of reasons.
So this is wonderful. Okay.
That is how we do.
Other food in the microphone, it's okay, no? I'm just coming. Okay. Appo, I'm interesting. The cat you did a kandu in the patichittu poi.
The correction in the calculus of constant is written by Gordon Tullock and Gordon Tullock and
okay.
Buchanan. Not Downs. Downs paper is different.
Voting in the period.
Yeah, that is
Appo.
okay.
Anthony, Downs, William Ricker, Buchanan. പിന്നെ ഞാൻ പറയാത്ത ഒരെണ്ണമുണ്ട് കേട്ടോ ഈ കാരിയർ തിയറീസ് അത് ഞാൻ വരുന്നേ കാരിയർ തിയറീസ് ഇതെനിക്ക് ഭയങ്കര ഇഷ്ടമുള്ളതാണ് ഈ ഫിസ്ക്കൽ ആൻഡ് ഇലക്ഷൻസിനെ പറ്റി നോക്കുമ്പം ഇത് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞതേ ഇല്ല ഇത് ഞാൻ പറയാം ബിഫോർ ദാറ്റ് P into B minus C will be huge. That's the way I explain. No, if the C is huge and P and B are not huge, then people prefer no to vote. Appo ee or embarrassment namukku prevent cheyanongil you have to I have to speak in English. You have to have a D variable over there. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you. So over here. So here the question that came from the Reshma, right? Reshma's answer is that she is unable to fit into any of these things because her concept of voting is based on that charisma or something like that. It's an efficiency based voting. So that's what it is. Entirely agree. And adding to that, he is telling that we cannot do a binary if you ask the test of the theory because I am either P or B, but I am everything. It can be P, it can be D, it can be D. It's a combined thing. We cannot strictly vote to compartmentalize. That point is very well taken. So the calculus of consent, the people that Siddiq mentioned that in the theory, what are the limitations of that theory? People started investigating that it is not a watertight compartmentalization, and he also introduced the carrier-based or a charisma-based theory which came in the future. So this I want to link into my topic as well on fiscal policy and elections, you know. The carrier theories that I think in the last class I mentioned, in the carrier theories in the public choice literature, people start looking into the charisma of a person and the way his background or the endowment, the personal endowment. Like if I am asking the deficit variable, what determines deficit, then I cannot strictly do an economic model to define the deficit determination, because it's not the economic variables that affected the deficit, but the personal characteristics of the person. That's one thing. Second is rate of interest. Recently I mentioned about the NPC in India by the RBI. Here the rate of interest determination, we have to ask a question, what is the carrier theories of a central bank governor? Whether it's a central bank governor's personal characteristics is affecting the rate of interest, or it's because of the poly crisis or mounting global inflation or any other economic determinants that affect. So these are the new kind of literature. For the same reason, we can also ask the question about the IGFT, intergovernmental fiscal relations. In the intergovernmental fiscal relations, now who is the chair? Arvind. So he is from Colombia, right? So we have to ask a question. His personal characteristics affect the way the fiscal transfers will be decided, and will Kerala will be discriminated or Kerala will be favored. And that question relates to the question Sneha asked, whether he decides on equity or efficiency. So these are the questions we need to ask, and it depends on the charisma of the personal endowment of a leader. Then another question which is very controversial now in the context of India, that's Timothy Bisley's paper in LSE. They asked, do educated leaders matter? Because the personal characteristics of a prime minister affects economic growth. So that question can be asked. So there are different economic growth and the PM. So this is very important. I forgot to tell you about the personal non-economic factors, and Siddiq, when the moment he told about charisma, the moment you told about that personal based thing, then you know we need to take this literature away from the economic determination. How do you determine interest rate in our country? If I ask, that depends on the personal characteristics as well. And I heard a presentation in IMF that looks into the gender question. Janet Yellen was the central bank chief of US, right? So more or less the inference is like this, that if woman is a central bank governor or a chief, then she's going to be hawkish. In the sense, in the inflation targeting literature, you know that how do you peg your interest rate? It depends on the inflationary expectation and the output gap. You know that Taylor rule, right? So if the output gap is narrow, then there is a chance for the woman to go hawkish. They increase the rate of interest to tackle the inflation if the output gap is narrow. But if the output gap is not narrow, then the central bank governor looks into the growth recovery process. But in India, we are not looking at output gap at all, because the primary mandate of the central bank governor now and the NPC is to look into the inflation containment. So the price stability is the sole criteria of the monetary policy. This output of the economic growth is done by the fiscal policy authorities. So then comes the question, who is the first mover here? In the macroeconomic policy realm, whom you are giving the first mover advantage, whether the monetary policy or the fiscal policy. If you are giving the first mover advantage to the monetary policy maker, then it is like a central bank independence. That's the way the macroeconomic framework is articulated. And I don't know in Kenya, in Afghanistan, it's central bank independence. Monetary policy in Yemen, they have the S. But in India, the fiscal policy authorities are the first movers. because its central bank is not independent. Yeah, so that leads to the theory of unpleasant monetary arithmetic. Means you can control your inflation today or tomorrow. If the inflation is your consideration, you moved away from seigniorage financing of deficit to bond financing. But the bond financing cannot go on if your rate of interest of the economy is greater than the real growth of the economy. So if the R is greater than G, you eventually monetize your deficit. That's why your monetary arithmetic is unpleasant. Unpleasant monetary arithmetic. That is another literature, Sargent and Wallace, you can write. So it's very interesting that from that Reshma's and Siddiq's thing, I opened up to this question related to the personal charisma and the first mover advantage. These are important things I forgot to tell you. And that's it. And all these things begins with the intertemporal budget constraint. Intertemporal budget constraint in the sense, you have the deficit, right? And this deficit, you can split into the primary balance and your past commitments. So here the deficit is, you have the investment or the capital budget and the revenue budget. Then you deduct your past liability by rate of interest in the past debt is your interest payment. So how do you enter? The question asked by that boy regarding the thematic bond financing comes from the financing pattern. So you have to start from the intertemporal budget constraint. And here, this is a primary balance. And many economists focus on this primary balance, not on the past debt or interest payment. Crucial variable which we economists always bother, in the sense, how much of your revenue receipts you collected is going in terms of debt servicing. If that's the case, you're crowding out the developmental spending, right? So that's another way of looking into this debt deficit dynamics. So Oliver Blanchard is a good book, and he published that book, Public Debt in Times of Low Interest Rate Regime. That's the name of Oliver Blanchard's book. And now his tweets, you can read that his book got published when the central bank started going hawkish. Then he told that, but my book has relevance in future. Because in the low interest rate regime, if the high debt and high deficit, if a country is using to reduce the output gap and to increase the public spending in infrastructure, that is validated because the interest rate is lower. But now, after the publication of the book, the country started going hawkish because inflation was mounting. To tackle that, now it's a high interest rate regime. Then if the interest rate is high, means the IP, your debt servicing will be costlier. So there is a kind of a internal inconsistency when you talk about the inflation targeting and public debt management. So this is the conflict of interest. Like if the central bank is a public debt management entity, then how can you substantiate inflation targeting? Because inflation targeting, you may have to go little high in terms of an interest rate. But if the interest rate is high, then the public debt management is going costlier. So these are the difficult times, but when we designed new monetary policy framework in India, then the debt were not that high, deficit was not high. It was strictly under that 3%, the fiscal rules. So we didn't think about this situation. Now, debt is high, deficit is high, and the interest rate is also high. So we are facing that right now. So now this conflict of interest is real. We need to take out. And somebody asked me about the regulatory versus facilitator question. So there, these questions are really important. Like, how do you tackle this public debt management? Do we have time to tackle the answers? Like 5 minutes? Yes, just I will quickly get into the questions. I'll club and answer, okay? Club and answer your questions. One favorite question is here. I start with Kenya. He talked about the expenditure and taxation side, right, of a political economy decision of the fiscal stance before the elections. He mentioned that in his country, one is like pork barrel funds, you mentioned. Pork barrel in the sense, politicians have, like our MP, Shashi Tharoor and all, politicians have a specific fiscal transfer element with them. So will they be using that favoring the people? But the pork barrel, the quantity of the pork barrel funds of a politician, we need to look into how much is it. So whether it's a significant component or not. That is one thing. Second, you mentioned about the mineral extraction and you're giving a lot of tax concessions to them. So this literature is related to the tax expenditure. So in India also we have tax expenditure studies. How do you define tax expenditure? How much tax concessions, tax exemptions you're giving to the mineral owners or whatever it is, whatever the tax exemptions, what is the revenue foregone? That literature is coming up in the tax expenditure literature. So tax expenditure you can look into, but we generally don't want any tax holiday, tax concessions or anything. That's a way, another concern you raised about the tax expenditure. Third, you mentioned that if we go on doing this on the fiscal side, fiscal policy is inflationary. That's a huge statement, fiscal deficit and inflation. That's a huge question. But in many countries, Prabhat Patnaik, his process of thinking is that inflation is determined not by the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy cannot be inflationary if your economy is below the full employment equilibrium. So it's not in terms of prices it will manifest, but in terms of the output. So if you're below full employment equilibrium, you're fine. But fiscal policy is inflationary. This question can also be looked into from the Chicago School of Thought, like Woodford, Cochrane. Many economists have written about fiscal policy of price determination. Can you see that irony? If I am opening this, it will be dry, right? My pen got dried. Fiscal policy of fiscal theory of price determination, it got dry. Fiscal theory of price determination. You can ask me a question, how can price determination be fiscal? Because price determination is a monetary thing, right? Of course, if I take it ahead, you can say that price determination is also affected by many supply side variables. So the supply shocks, it is not strictly monetary phenomenon, your theory. But FTPD, the fiscal theories of price determination talks about you peg your interest rate based on inflationary expectations and output gap that comes through the financing channel of deficit, like your UMA, that unpleasant monetary arithmetic, and the revised form of, the refined form of this unpleasant monetary arithmetic you can read in this fiscal theories of price determination. So these are all talking about the fiscal side of inflation. That was a brilliant question. So I answered about Bennett's question, it just came to my mind. And you also talk about the cash transfers and the kind of the pork barrel funds which are going on hike or enhanced prior to the elections. You are right. Like cash transfers, when you design your fiscal space, you have to ask a question. You will design more on the basic income or participation income to influence the voters' mind. And the basic question is, if you go into the universal basic income, that is designing cash transfers into the hands of the people. In India, in the debates, like Congress was designing more of cash transfers. In the political manifesto, if you read the Congress, they were more into cash transfer design. But the other government was not into the cash transfers. You're right, like cash transfers can influence the decision-making power of voters prior to the elections. Now, the other questions related to the Yemen, whatever coming to my mind, I'm talking about it. Tax financing. Then I forgot to mention about, somebody asked about neoclassical, neoliberal and that regime in which you think that the fiscal policy, that crowding out and come from the neoclassical literature. But you mentioned about the tax financing versus debt financing. But in the Ricardian equivalence theorem, it's a third school of thought. Whatever I'm talking was about more or less a Keynesian model that a timely deficit is good, it helps your economy. Then this neoclassical talks about the crowding out. This is third school of thought which talks about neutral, equivalence, in the sense tax financing or debt financing, it's going to impact your economy equally because today's deficit is tomorrow's taxes. So that's the way they call it as, whether it doesn't matter, it will have the equal impact on economy. But you mentioned that in the fragile economies, that you do more of taxation to extract more money from the people to go ahead with the expenditure design when you have the curtailing deficit or the debt dynamics in your country. But that's the case, Another question Shiba asked me, other than private sector, like the impact on the private sector, like more in the time of war. That's a very good hypothesis. Like in the fragile economies, how do you focus more on the private sector? That's an important point you mentioned. Now, Sneha, your question. I do agree with you. IGFT, it has to be on equality or equity or efficiency or equality. That depends on the way that Finance Commission chairperson takes a decision. And if he is basing his intergovernmental fiscal transfer design more on equality equality rather than efficiency, then he will look forward to the economic convergence. Economic convergence in the sense like the poor states need to catch up with the rich states. So what should be the criteria when you devote the funds on the basis of this economic convergence? Then you tend to focus more of your IGFT on the population and the area and the income distance and all, because you need to go ahead with an economic convergence. And there's a paper by Pinaki, I worked with him on economic convergence. We looked into that question from the club convergence perspective. Club convergence in the sense you group the states, inland states and the coastal states. So, coastal states are faster in economic growth because of another geographical reasons and all. So the club convergence, when you incorporate the fiscal variables, whether the club convergence is working or not. So these kind of literature are there incorporating the IGFT variables to talk about the economic convergence. And if the Finance Commission chair is focusing on economic convergence, then Kerala will have a tough time. So we have to then ask the question that our efficiency, because we are a fast growing state, our efficiency is getting penalized, then the population we control. So density of population, so all these questions will be very relevant then if you are focusing on the efficiency. But we think that there will be a beautiful balance between the efficiency and equality when it comes to IGFT. But again, it depends on your career theory, the charisma or the personal endowment of the members and the chair will decide that. That's about the Sneha's question. Then the first question was asked about the legal framework by Shafiq. Yeah, we don't have any laws to control that other than fiscal rules. Fiscal rules will tightly fix our deficit. And I think that's there in Afghanistan also. You have a fiscal rule that we cannot spend more than that. I am clubbing the other questions related to the fiscal rules also with Shafiq's question. So what happens is that if you want to reach your strict law-based fiscal deficit, either you have to increase the revenue or curtail your spending. But when revenues are not buoyant, you curtail your spending. And when you cut the spending, when you go for fiscal austerity, that will affect the economy. That's why I asked Annie that whether you call that fiscal discipline growth enhancing. Because your deficit is okay, but you are curtailing the spending. Whether that will be okay. Then she told that no, it has to be an inclusive fiscal policy. Quick answers, we can chat later. Shafiq's question, Shaima's question, Sneha's question and Bennett's question answered. Now Aditya, neoclassical, tough question. A regulator versus facilitator, right? Of course, we all study in the public finance that non-excludable and non-rival goods you provide, the rest you leave it to the market. So that's the way you perceive the state versus government. Like you just push back to a facilitator role, don't get into too much of thing. But in the due course, when you look into the externalities, the spending which has positive externalities, you call it as merit good, and state started getting into the education, health, from the initial law and order and non-rival, non-excludable goods. So the state started becoming a participant, like state versus market, because there are many market failures. So that invisible hand and all, when it failed, the role of the government became very strong. That literature is very beautiful. You will be studying that, and Alan Peacock you read. That name of that paper is The Economics of Government. Using the lighthouse example, the Alan Peacock has beautifully explained about this question about the role of government. You take a look into Alan Peacock. He's from London School of Economics. So he's our Gulati Institute, Gulati's supervisor. Gulati studied in London School for his PhD. He's supervisor, Alan Peacock, and you must have studied about that displacement, public expenditure theory, Peacock-Weisman hypothesis and all, that Peacock. So take a look into that work. Now, the question by Annie. I do agree that the inclusive fiscal policy, I do agree. It's not about the fiscal discipline. And you also questioning the elections. Did you? No, who questioned the elections? Ananda Padmanabhan. Yes, I wrote it. No, you talked about the lecture you heard about this election procedures and all, no? The form of spending. Of course, over the years, you can track the election spending. Over the years, if you look at the time series data, the spending of elections has increased. Now let me club that to the electoral bonds thing together. So in order to make this process transparent, you got into the electoral bonds process. But electoral bond, in a simple terms, if I say that things are transparent at the tails, like Sheeja ma'am take the electoral bond in the digital formal process, and she's giving it to me. That is invisible. And that electoral bond, when I try to redeem, I have to again go to some place where that is transparent to redeem it. So what is transparent are the tails. Because through the digital, through the formal process, she got the bond and I am redeeming it, that is visible. But what is invisible is, she has given to me, only I know and she knows. Okay, that is invisible. And it created a lot of problem, but later on we got the data from that electronic things and all. So, if you ask me whether electoral bond makes the election funds transparent, it will not. That India has realized because of this non-transparency in the deals in the middle. So, for me, electoral bonds is a failure and it became the chronic thing. Ananda Padmanabhan, I enjoyed most of the points you told me, and you didn't ask any specific question, but for the people, if the size of the government, whatever way government designs the spending, if it is for the people, what is your issue? Then you yourself told that accountability is the issue. So my point is only that, like you design your fiscal space, but the transparency and accountability is a great deal. And we always talk about that fiscal marksmanship. If the accountability fails, like you promise the people that you will do many things at the time of elections and it gets captured in the budget estimate stage when your budget is done. But after 1 year, when you look at the revised estimates and Controller and Auditor General, they give your estimates like actual spending is much less than what you visualized and promised by the government. If the marksmanship and the accountability is not perfect, then you can question the fiscal space. Otherwise, you are telling that the government fiscal space is for the people. You don't mind whatever way the fiscal space is designed because it's for the people. That's what you told. I do agree to that point, but accountability we all look into, like the marksmanship analysis. And usually, in the literature, again we have a paper. Like we can look into that accountability, whether this promise and the actual spending, that deviation happened is due to the random factors. I mentioned about many polycrisis elements, right? So the finance minister's dream go haywire if the random factors affects his budget numbers. That's okay. But if it is because of the bias in his assumptions and model, then accountability you need to question. Because you have to revise your assumptions, you have to revise your models to correct this
deviation. It has to be less. What you promise, what you deliver needs to be quite okay. So I agree that fiscal space, but again Bennett's question, like a lot of cash transfers, or you promise people a participation income. That is another decision by fiscal maker or a finance minister. You design more of cash transfers, or within that fiscal space you design more of participation income by giving employment to people. So that question a minister can decide. Now stock market volatility, I told that it is just a random walk. Sneha participated, it's just a random walk. Then Hindutva ideology, I'm not getting into the political economic questions, we can talk later. But all what I can say is that മൃഗീയമായ ഒരു ഭൂരിപക്ഷത്തോടു കൂടി വരുന്നതും coalition ആയിട്ട് നിൽക്കും. For you I am telling you, like a majority party in power and a coalition party in power. That coalition, these two are different when it comes to its influence or its determination regarding the fiscal policy. So coalition government is better, military government is better, or a majoritarian government is better. Scholars have looked into, but then in Pakistan, GDP was huge when military was in power. But does it mean that military is the best form of government? Because sustainability in the GDP and the other variables we need to take a look. So it's very important that the form of the government and the economic growth are closely correlated. Now, Sethu Lakshmi's question, promised versus reality, I answered that question to Angel, okay? Mary's question, the calculus of consent, Sethu Lakshmi and Parvati, both you have that political economic questions with Sethu's concern about the unit of analysis being the village. India lives in villages, that statement I enjoyed. And how you visualize India in the global scale, whether we can celebrate this growth. It's very tricky if you ask me to look into the base effect. Growth can happen if there is a base effect. Like if you are in a pit, you grow much. Two students you take, the marks you can compare. Like one person may be stable in the marks, but if you look into the growth rate is not huge. The other student, very digital marks, first time you may not get good marks, but second time you get very good marks. So if you compare that base effect, your growth will be huge. So when you interpret the growth numbers, you have to be very careful about the base effect. And of course, the unit of analysis should be like the lowest tier of the government, and you have to put more focus on the third tier. That point is very well taken. And Aparna's electoral bond I answered with Zambia morning. Your thematic bond questions by Akash and minerals and metals, that's what you told, no? You are getting into a chronic kind of a state business relations by giving a lot of tax concessions to the extractive sector. That's a huge issue. And in University Manchester, a friend of mine has studied this, looking into the state business relations. I can share that work with you through your professor. They came to the conclusion that if the state business is crony, giving a lot of emphasis, but now Adani is there, but lot of concessions you give to the particular industrialist by the state. As I mentioned earlier, that land projects work, the deals create inequality in the system. So whom do you support matter, and that is also linked to your name please? Alina's question about the corporate taxation. You asked me, right? In the global taxation principles, if you look at that OECD Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, Pillar 2 is about a global minimum taxes. And global minimum taxation is to avoid the tax war, you reduce the corporate taxes to the 15%. But whether that's good, whether you are getting into, whether that's not a freebie, these are the questions, we ask that we are giving a lot of concessions to the corporate sector. But when you look into the effective taxes, the mining and extractive sector may not be paying as much taxes as the small or medium industries. Effective taxes of small and medium industries is higher than the higher firms. So the question is, you should have a differential corporate tax policy. That's the way Nirmala Sitharaman began in India. Like she declared corporate taxation concession or the rate difference first for the firms below a particular threshold, then she make it global. So we need to ask the questions about this corporate taxation. How do you attract the mobile capital? To avoid the tax war, to attract the mobile capital, you go for a global minimum taxes. So I clubbed Elena's question with Moni's question. Now thematic bond, like Akash thought that it is a useful thing, climate bond and gender bond or inequality addressing through the bonds. That's okay. Fuzia, feminization of governance, you asked, right? I do believe in that, like 33%. There are different ways to take it, but a reservation for a particular group or ethnicity or a gender or taking into consideration the intersectionality issues into the public policy, that's important. Once you make it inclusive, then you can answer the questions of efficiency or competition later. But I do believe in feminization of governance, and I do believe in intersectionality, like giving ethnicity a place in the public policy making. I do believe in that. And we have that Duffler's paper showing affirmative answer in positive, like feminization of governance high, the public expenditure decisions favoring that particular group is also high. It's not an inverse relationship. Then Sneha's, the second Sneha's question on deficits, the targets to be achieved. Yeah, let me take that as the final, because Karishma and the other questions related to the calculus of consent by Siddiq we have already talked about. So this is the penultimate question by Sneha on deficits and interest rate to be achieved. That's my final statement. Deficit is fixed now through a fiscal rule. And how this target can be achieved? It needs to be achieved through the revenue buoyancy. But if you go through the fiscal austerity measures by curtailing the public spending, it will affect the quality of output. It will affect the quality of human development formation. So that's it. Thank you so much. Any further questions you can ask me later. I will share you my Gmail. Oh, it got dry. Lekha Chakraborty at gmail.com. Fine?
So with that, we have come to the end of the session. Now I invite Sneha Sajjan to deliver the board of things.
Esteemed professors and fellow learners, hope we are having a very enlightened noon. I feel so fortunate to propose a word of thanks
for the session led by Lekha ma'am,
who has been there with us from day one of our orientation classes till this day.
And anyways, to begin with,
I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our department head, Dr. Sheeja sir, for always ensuring that we are in line with academic exposure. Coming to Lekha ma'am, being the finest economist in town, her commitment and care for this department is always admirable. And the way she looked at things, economics, and the way she perceived economics has also motivated us to delve deeper into the subject. On behalf of the Department of Economics, I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Lekha Chakraborty. I also take this moment to thank our beloved professors, Dr. Prasad, Dr. Manju S. Nair, Dr. Anita, Dr. Christabel, and Siddiq sir for all the love and support that you were giving us. A word of gratitude to all the participants for keeping up the energy. Thank you and have a good day.
Okay, thank you so much. Wish you all the best.